In the grand halls of Yewtree Lodge, wealth drips from every corner, but so does something far more sinister. A nursery rhyme echoes through the shadows, promising death with every verse. When a powerful man collapses with pockets full of rye, Miss Marple knows this is no accident. Because in this house, everyone has a secret and someone is rewriting the rhyme in blood. Stay with me, and together we'll unravel the chilling mystery of a pocket full of rye before the blackbirds come for us all. If you think you've pieced together the killer's twisted plan, prove it. Leave your theory in the comments below. And if you crave more mysteries darker than the blackest bird, don't just watch, subscribe now and join Miss Marple on every spine-chilling case. Because the next riddle might already be waiting, and you won't want to miss what happens when the rhyme begins again. Chapter 1. The cursed household. There is a peculiar hush that settles over Yewtree Lodge with the first light of dawn, an ancestral silence broken only by the faint rustle of leaves and the low, haunting refrain of a rhyme every child knows, but few understand. Sing a song of sixpence. In this grand house, beyond the wrought-iron gates, the Fortescue family moves through rooms steeped in old money and older resentments, each member concealing an unspoken wish, a whispered fear, or a long-forgotten betrayal. Nothing seemed out of place until it suddenly was. Rex Fortescue, a man whose success had earned him admiration and quiet loathing in equal measure, presided over this opulent prison with the confidence of one who believed his empire unassailable. Yet on this morning, as the heavy curtains parted to reveal pale sunlight filtering across his study, something felt disjointed, like a note struck ever so slightly off-key. His second wife, Adele, drifted through the halls with a cold elegance, eyes flickering with secrets exposed only in fleeting reflections. Percival, the eldest son, rehearsed a carefully constructed facade of loyalty while calculating every potential inheritance. Jennifer, Percival's wife, watched all with a gaze sharp enough to cut. Lance, the charming younger son who had vanished overseas years before, was rumored to be returning. His absence, and the possibility of his arrival, weighed like a storm cloud over every conversation. Among the household staff, there were hushed exchanges about a locked room in the East Wing, a chamber said to hold an heirloom more valuable, and more cursed, than gold. In the kitchens, a telegram had arrived late in the night, but its contents remained a cryptic puzzle, locked away in the mind of the butler, whose footsteps echoed alone in the darkness long after others had retired. Shadows gathered along the staircase as the clock chimed the hour. The atmosphere thickened with a sense of betrayal left unspoken, of a double life yet to be discovered. Each face at the breakfast table flickered with a motive that could justify the most brutal acts of revenge, even as they smiled politely and stirred their tea. Through it all, Miss Marple observed quietly from her corner of the room, her keen eyes tracing every subtle glance and slight hesitation. She knew that in households like these, where inheritance breeds suspicion and legacy can mask a murderous intent, the truth is often more dangerous than the lies. There were hints already. A blackbird perched ominously on the window ledge, watching as though recording every whispered confession, a diary torn in two and hastily hidden in the library's darkest shelf, a family portrait where a figure had been scratched out with almost violent rage. And so begins our journey into a household bound by blood, but fractured by deceit, a place where every alibi casts a longer shadow, every clue deepens the maze, and every whispered rhyme promises that the final hour is yet to come. Viewers, if you wish to unravel every cryptic layer of this twisted tapestry with Miss Marple herself, do consider subscribing now so you won't miss a single clue in the unraveling of A Pocket Full of Rye. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the rye grains scattered beside Rex Fortescue's morning tea service, a clue too out of place to be coincidence, too deliberate to be ignored. As the servants cleared the table, their hands trembled almost imperceptibly, each glance over the shoulder betraying an awareness of something unspoken, a shared dread of what might come next. The atmosphere inside Yewtree Lodge seemed to tighten with every hour, like a rope drawn ever so gradually around unsuspecting throats. At the edge of conversations floated words of past affairs, old scandals, and rumors of a fortune earned through deception. Fragments of gossip layered into a tapestry of motives that included greed, jealousy, and revenge. A faint scratching noise could be heard outside the parlor window, blackbirds, gathering on bare branches, peering in as silent witnesses to the unfolding tableau. In the library, a cryptic telegram lay discarded, its message partly burned in the grate, but a single word remained legible: poison. Upstairs, Adele's reflection shimmered in the gilt-edged mirror as she adjusted a necklace passed down through generations, a prized heirloom whose origin, some whispered, had been a scandalous affair sealed with betrayal. Her hand paused, eyes darting to the door at the faintest echo of footsteps. In the corridor beyond, Percival reviewed accounts of the family business, his face composed yet marked by a cold calculation. His wife Jennifer sat silently nearby, fingers tracing the rim of her teacup, lost in thoughts no one dared interrupt. Meanwhile, servants muttered about the locked room in hushed tones, recalling a night years before when Lance had vanished after a violent reaction to a family revelation. No one had spoken of it since. Miss Marple took note of every subtle clue, the strained smiles, the clipped tones, the unspoken words hanging in the air like a fog refusing to lift. Nothing in the grand drawing-room was amiss at first glance. Portraits of ancestors lined the walls, silver polished to a mirror's gleam, a ticking clock marking time in measured beats. Yet in one painting, the eyes of the matriarch appeared to follow visitors with unsettling precision, a silent observer of every confession uttered within those walls. The butler, face pale beneath the gaslights, carried a silver tray through the house. The way his eyes flicked toward the locked room revealed a knowledge he dared not voice. On a narrow table beside the stairs rested a diary bound in cracked leather. Its last entry ended abruptly mid-sentence, as though the writer had been interrupted by an unseen force. Outside, the sky darkened despite the hour, clouds thickening overhead as though the house itself exhaled an ancient curse. And in the quiet that followed, Miss Marple's thoughts turned over the facts, testing each piece of the puzzle. She knew the Fortescue family's past hid more than a single secret. This was a legacy woven with deception, every thread binding the household closer to a fate none could yet imagine. As evening descended upon Yewtree Lodge, the house grew quieter still, yet every creak of the floorboards seemed amplified. Every flicker of candlelight carved shadows that hinted at forms just beyond the eye's certainty. The blackbirds that had watched from the branches took flight, their wings slicing through the dusk in sharp, erratic patterns, as though unsettled by the restless energy gathering within the walls. In the drawing-room, Miss Marple lingered by the fireplace, tracing her finger along the carved wood where initials had been etched decades earlier. Initials that belonged to a Fortescue long forgotten by the family, yet whose legacy now stirred rumors of inheritance disputes and violent reaction to old wounds reopened. A family legend spoke of a betrayal so profound that each generation felt its echo, a tale punctuated by cryptic rhymes whispered to children as cautionary warnings. At the top of the staircase, Adele hesitated before the locked room, the brass key glinting in her hand as if daring her to uncover what lay beyond. Her breath quickened, her eyes darted to the darkness behind her, certain she heard footsteps following though the corridor appeared empty. She turned the key halfway before a sudden, sharp noise from below drew her away, a sound like porcelain shattering, reverberating through the house with a finality that set every nerve on edge. Jennifer clutched her husband's arm as they descended the stairs, their expressions masks of polite concern, though the strain at the corners of their mouths betrayed deeper turmoil. Percival murmured something about maintaining appearances. Jennifer's eyes, sharp and knowing, followed Adele with a curiosity that bordered on suspicion. In the kitchens, the cook huddled with the housemaid, voices dropping to near silence as they exchanged theories about who might stand to gain most from Rex Fortescue's anticipated inheritance, who had the strongest motive hidden behind a genial facade, who might confess if pressed with the right question at the right moment. A red herring had already emerged. Talk of a mysterious telegram addressed not to Rex, but to a name no one in the household recognized, a name that vanished from the paper trails decades earlier. The drawing-room's clock struck 8. The chimes rang out with a cold precision, each note lingering a fraction longer than comfort allowed. Miss Marple raised her head, eyes glinting beneath the brim of her hat, as if the sound itself revealed a clue overlooked by everyone else. She scanned the faces of the family assembled under the heavy chandelier, masks of composure that couldn't quite hide the unease tightening their features. And so the first day at Yewtree Lodge closed not with resolution, but with the quiet certainty that the true extent of the Fortescue family's secrets had only begun to surface. The rhyme lingered in every corridor, each line a reminder of an unsolved puzzle whose resolution might expose a deception years in the making. Viewers, should you wish to follow Miss Marple's every discovery, every clue that peels back the layers of this shadowy household, I invite you now subscribe, so you will not miss the next revelation in A Pocket Full of Rye. For in this house, the night has only just begun, and by morning, more truths will whisper from the darkness, daring those who remain to listen. Chapter 2. Death in the Office. A hush settled over Yewtree Lodge as the night's final candle sputtered out, leaving hallways awash in wavering shadows. Yet by morning, the quiet gave way to an atmosphere taut with unease. Eyes darted to the grand staircase, ears strained for sounds no one wished to hear. Nothing seemed out of place until it suddenly was. At precisely 9:30, a muted crash echoed from the study. The butler, pale and unsteady, was the first to reach the heavy oak door, finding it ajar by the smallest margin. Inside, Rex Fortescue sat slumped behind his polished desk, face contorted in an expression that seemed both shocked and pained, hand frozen mid-reach toward his teacup. An unsettling hush fell over the household as staff and family members arrived one by one, drawn by the unnatural silence blanketing the room. On the surface, nothing was amiss. The desk neatly arranged, Morning Post stacked in precise order, papers aligned as though awaiting Rex's decisive signature. Yet a closer glance revealed details that hinted at a far more disturbing truth: rye grains scattered across his waistcoat, a blackbird's feather resting on the window ledge as if placed there with deliberate care, the faint scent of something bitter lingering in the air, carried on a current no one could trace. Miss Marple, having observed the commotion from the corridor, stepped softly into the room, eyes sweeping every corner, her thoughts assembling the first fragments of a puzzle already riddled with contradiction. The expressions of those gathered betrayed more than grief. Percival's jaw clenched as though fighting an urge to speak. Adele's hands shook as she adjusted her pearl necklace, eyes flitting to the rye grains with a recognition she quickly masked. Jennifer pressed a handkerchief to her mouth, her gaze darting between family members as if assessing each alibi. Over the course of that hour, the drawing room transformed into an uneasy gathering place where whispered theories took shape. Motives began to surface, like the suggestion of an affair Rex had kept secret, or rumors of a betrayal rooted in an inheritance dispute. A telegram bearing his name but addressed with the words "Final" rested on a silver tray beside his chair. A cryptic clue whose meaning would haunt every conversation to come. Outside the study's wide windows, blackbirds clustered in the hedges, their movements abrupt and disquieting, each sudden flutter casting shifting patterns across the room. In the hush that followed, Miss Marple listened carefully, attuned to the subtle interplay of gasps, murmurs, and unspoken accusations. The atmosphere thickened with every minute the body remained untouched, every second the cause of this tragedy remained unsolved. Then, a low voice spoke. Could it have been poison? The word itself hung in the air, sharp as a blade, refracting through every mind present. Glances shifted, shoulders tensed, alliances subtly realigned beneath polite exteriors. The suggestion unleashed a flood of theories. Had the tea been prepared in the kitchen by hands with a motive? Had a dose been slipped into the sugar bowl resting innocuously on the silver tray? Or had Rex himself carried the means to his own end, bound by secrets exposed in the final hour? Miss Marple leaned forward, eyes narrowing on the fine porcelain cup that still steamed faintly in the morning light, her thoughts circling around details so small they would escape the casual observer. A smudge on the cup's rim, a rye grain caught between the saucer's edge and the folded napkin. A stain on the handle that did not match the rest of the service. Each clue felt like a whisper from the room itself, hinting that deception had not only entered Yewtree Lodge, but had taken a seat at the breakfast table. A hush clung to the halls of Yewtree Lodge even as servants scurried to and fro with urgent purpose, their faces pale, their eyes fixed on the carpet rather than meet one another's gaze. The study's door, now firmly closed, loomed like a locked room guarding truths no one wished to acknowledge. Outside, blackbirds shifted restlessly among the hedges, their movements punctuated by sharp cries that seemed to mock the household's unease. Within the study, Miss Marple's keen eyes swept the space once more. She noted the framed telegrams pinned above the desk. Messages hinting at a recent business scandal, references to an heirloom long rumored to carry a curse, and one telegram bearing a single word, confession. A diary, half open on the writing table, revealed an entry unfinished, the final line reading only, "They will all know soon enough," before the words trailed into a desperate scrawl. Whispers spread quickly among the family gathered in the drawing room, voices low, sentences clipped. Percival's hand trembled as he straightened the buttons of his jacket. Adele pressed a cold cloth to her forehead, her breathing uneven, her thoughts lost somewhere far from the polite condolences she offered aloud. Jennifer kept to the shadows near the window, eyes glinting with something beyond grief, calculating, perhaps, or remembering a betrayal yet unspoken. A shadowy figure crossed the corridor outside the study. For a moment, Miss Marple caught sight of Lance, newly arrived, his return unannounced but perfectly timed. His face bore an unsettling calm, as though he had arrived expecting to find the household in turmoil. His sudden reappearance sent a ripple of suspicion through the others, a quiet understanding that his alibi would require careful examination. In hushed conversations by the staircase, staff spoke of a violent reaction long ago. Of Lance's abrupt departure years earlier after a confrontation with Rex that had left more questions than answers. Rumors of a double life surfaced, stories of alliances abroad and fortunes gambled on shadowy ventures. Each word fueled a growing sense that the motive behind the tragedy in the study was tangled in a legacy of secrets exposed only when the stakes were impossibly high. Miss Marple's mind worked methodically, matching each clue with every whispered theory. The rye grains aligning with the rhyme, the telegram referencing a confession, the diary's abrupt ending, and the blackbirds lingering outside as if drawn by some cryptic invitation. Every detail hinted at a plan executed with precision, yet left just enough contradictions to raise the question: had the plan been executed by one mind alone, or were more hands involved? As the grandfather clock in the hall struck 10, its somber tone carried through the house, marking time with a finality that left everyone holding their breath. The hour's chime felt heavier than any before, as though each note counted down to an unseen reckoning. A sense of rage, once dormant in family histories, seemed to radiate from every portrait lining the walls, each painted face gazing down on the gathered suspects with a cold, watchful silence. The hush that settled over the household deepened into a suffocating stillness, broken only by the distant flutter of blackbirds as they scattered to the treetops, as though something unseen had disturbed their uneasy vigil. In the study, lamplight cast wavering shadows across the walls, highlighting the meticulous arrangement of papers on Rex's desk, papers that, upon closer inspection, revealed more than mere business dealings. There were letters marked private tucked inside a leather-bound folder, each referencing an affair whispered about in corners of the village but never spoken of within the family's grand halls. Adele's gaze fixed on the letters with a look of recognition she could not hide. A single bead of sweat traced a line down her cheek as her hand reached out before pulling back at the last moment. Across the room, Lance stepped closer, eyes flickering with something unreadable, as if every detail of the scene confirmed a suspicion he had carried since his return. His voice, low and careful, carried across the room as he asked, "Who had the opportunity?" The question, simple yet sharp, sliced through the hush like a blade. Miss Marple watched every reaction, every glance exchanged in the wake of that question. A subtle twitch of Percival's mouth, a tightening of Jennifer's jaw, the butler's eyes dropping quickly to the floor. It was in these silent exchanges that the most important clues whispered themselves into being, unspoken admissions that would one day matter far more than any spoken words. She noted the rye grains, still scattered upon the dark wool of Rex's waistcoat, as though placed with a purpose known only to their author. The rhyme played softly in her mind, each line a clue, each word a promise of a fate set in motion long before this morning's tragedy. On the windowsill, the blackbird's feather had shifted slightly since her last glance, as if caught by a current of air only it could feel. Whispers of a red herring reached Miss Marple's ears from the hallway, suggestions that an outsider, unknown to the family, had slipped into the house. That a stranger with a grudge dating back to an old scandal might have arrived unannounced. Yet she knew such rumors often obscured the truth rather than revealed it, and that the answers lay not in fanciful theories but in the careful weaving of motive, opportunity, and clue. Outside the study, the sky darkened once more, clouds rolling in with a heavy silence that settled over the estate. Thunder rumbled distantly, a reminder that time was slipping away, that the window to uncover the truth before more secrets exposed themselves, or before another violent reaction occurred, grew smaller with every tick of the grandfather clock. Miss Marple allowed herself a final, thoughtful glance around the room, eyes resting on the telegram bearing the words "final hour," the diary with its last incomplete line, and the rye grains that now seemed a message more than a mere coincidence. Nothing about the morning's events could yet be called solved. Rather, every clue pointed deeper into a labyrinth of motives, unspoken betrayals, and a legacy none of them could escape. And so, as the echoes of the clock's final chime faded into the hush of Yewtree Lodge, the mystery only grew thicker, the stakes far higher, and the sense that the household stood on the edge of revelations far more brutal than any had dared imagine. Chapter 3. Descent into Madness. The final chime of the grandfather clock had barely faded when a strange hush settled once more over Yewtree Lodge, thicker than before, as though the walls themselves held their breath. Blackbirds, silent in the branches beyond the study window, appeared frozen, their dark eyes fixed on the house with an intensity that felt almost knowing. Nothing seemed out of place until it suddenly was. Throughout the corridors, light shifted in subtle, unsettling ways, shadows lengthening without obvious cause, reflections in mirrors appearing to flicker a fraction behind the movements of those they captured. Servants hesitated at doorways, unwilling to cross certain thresholds. Footsteps echoed with an odd, hollow resonance, as if the halls had grown longer overnight. Miss Marple observed these signs with a mind trained for the smallest clues, recognizing that madness, once it took root, could spread faster than the most cunning deception. She noted the hushed arguments near the drawing-room, Percival's voice raised one moment, then reduced to a strangled whisper the next, Adele pacing back and forth as though chased by unspoken guilt, Jennifer peering out of darkened windows as if expecting a figure to emerge from the shadows at any moment. The morning's discovery had unmoored something within the household. Suspicion seeped into every interaction. A telegram, delivered in the early hours and read aloud with a trembling voice, revealed that Rex's financial empire was built upon a betrayal known only to a few, a scandal that might have offered a motive to more than one suspect now trapped beneath Yewtree Lodge's heavy roof. A diary belonging to a former housekeeper surfaced in the linen closet. Its entries cryptic and unsettling, describing footsteps heard at impossible hours, whispered conversations through the walls, and a violent reaction witnessed late one stormy night, years before anyone had reason to suspect anything was amiss. The diary's final pages hinted at an unspoken confession, but the words dissolved into smudges as if someone had tried to erase them in desperate haste. In the dining hall, meals passed untouched. Eyes lingered on every hand reaching for a teacup, every glance exchanged across the table. A dropped fork rang out like a gunshot, jolting even the blackbirds from their perches beyond the window. The once comforting ticking of the grandfather clock now felt like a countdown, each beat pulling the family closer to revelations they could neither avoid nor control. Miss Marple's mind danced between clues: the rye grains, the blackbird's feather, the unfinished diary, the cryptic telegram. All puzzle pieces shifting into new patterns as she considered the possibility that what had begun as a simple question of motive now twisted into something far more treacherous. For in this household, rage long hidden behind polite facades threatened to break through, and secrets exposed under such pressure might provoke consequences more brutal than any had dared imagine. As night pressed its cold weight upon Yewtree Lodge, the household's strained silence began to crack under the mounting pressure. Adele, wandering the dimly lit halls alone, began to hear the faint strains of a nursery rhyme drifting through the darkness, notes that rose and fell like a child's song, yet no child had stepped foot in the house for years. She turned sharply at every whisper, her breath shallow, eyes darting from portrait to portrait as though each painted ancestor might spring to life and speak of her secrets. Lance, his return still fresh and unexplained, moved through the corridors with a studied calm that unsettled the others more than any open display of rage could have done. He paused outside the locked room, fingertips brushing the cold brass handle, a flicker of recognition and perhaps fear crossing his face before he stepped back into the shadows. Miss Marple, observing from the grand staircase, noted the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes lingered on the threshold of that forbidden space. In the kitchens, two maids whispered of an heirloom said to vanish and reappear without explanation, its sudden absences coinciding with moments of violent reaction in the household's history. One swore she glimpsed the heirloom, a jeweled brooch of remarkable craftsmanship, resting on a mantel where it had not been the night before, only for it to vanish again before sunrise. Another claimed to have heard footsteps crossing the attic floor at midnight, when all doors were locked and every resident accounted for. Meanwhile, Percival locked himself in his study, rifling through documents by candlelight, searching for clues to the cause of his father's fate. His face was haggard, eyes darting to shadows cast by every flickering flame. The clock struck 11, each chime more oppressive than the last, and with it came the unmistakable scent of something bitter drifting through the air, reminiscent of the morning's tea, and a reminder that poison, once suspected, casts a long and unsettling shadow over every sip. Jennifer, now more watchful than ever, lingered in doorways as if weighing each conversation for hidden meanings. Her eyes followed Adele with the intensity of someone convinced she alone knew the truth, yet too wary to voice it. Between them, an unspoken war of glances played out, one that Miss Marple recognized as a battlefield of silent accusations, shifting alliances, and desperate attempts to secure alibis. And still, the blackbirds gathered outside, their wings rustling in restless flurries that seemed to mirror the agitation within. From time to time, one would fly straight at the window, striking the glass with a dull thud before retreating to the branches, as if drawn again and again by the house's dark gravity. Miss Marple watched the pattern, her mind spinning connections between each clue, wondering what cryptic design might emerge if she only looked from the right angle. The air inside Yewtree Lodge felt thicker with each passing hour, as if the very walls exhaled a silent warning to all who dared linger. Flickering lamplight revealed fleeting glimpses of shapes moving just beyond the threshold of sight, reflections caught in mirrors where no one stood, shadows dancing at the far ends of hallways before vanishing into darkness. In the small hours, a shriek cut through the night, waking the household with a shock that sent every heart pounding. Servants huddled in corners, eyes wide with terror, whispering that a blackbird had found its way into the house, flapping wildly through the corridors as if guided by a force unseen. By the time Miss Marple reached the source of the commotion, the bird had vanished, leaving behind only a single black feather resting upon a stair, its placement too deliberate to be dismissed as chance. Adele, trembling as she descended from her room, insisted she had seen a figure standing at the end of the corridor, a man wearing a dark coat, face hidden in shadow. Yet when the others searched, the hall was empty, no footprints disturbed the dust on the floor, and doors remained securely locked from the inside. Lance listened with a quiet intensity, his eyes narrowed as if Adele's terror confirmed a suspicion he dared not yet speak. Percival began to show signs of unraveling composure. His voice quavered as he demanded answers from servants, accusing them of negligence or worse, while his own explanations for his whereabouts grew more tangled. Jennifer, whose calm had once been unshakable, was seen pressing her ear to closed doors, as if she expected to hear whispered confessions spilling forth in the dark. Outside, the blackbirds' numbers swelled, gathering in restless clusters atop the lodge's slate roof, their calls overlapping in a chorus that grew louder with every hour. It was as if the rhyme itself had come alive, weaving a spell of dread around every inhabitant of the house, ensuring none could escape its verses. In a fleeting moment of stillness, Miss Marple stood at the window, her reflection wavering in the glass as she contemplated the heirloom said to bring ruin upon those who touched it, the diary's last words hinting at a betrayal reaching further back than anyone dared consider, and the telegram foretelling an end that felt ever closer with each tick of the clock. And so the night bled into morning, the line between waking and nightmare blurring with every unexplained whisper, every sudden gust that extinguished a candle. Within Yewtree Lodge, secrets exposed themselves in slivers, offering more questions than answers, and drawing everyone deeper into a maze of suspicion, rage, and clues that refused to fit any simple design. Viewers, if you wish to trace every shadow and join Miss Marple in uncovering what truly lies beneath the polished facade of this house, I invite you to subscribe so you remain with us as the rhyme continues and the mystery darkens. My friends, the rhyme has only just begun to whisper its darkest secrets, and the true face behind each shadow remains hidden. If you wish to follow every cryptic clue, every sudden twist, and every confession waiting to surface in a pocket full of rye, do consider subscribing now. Your presence ensures you'll never miss a moment as Miss Marple guides us deeper into this tale of betrayal, motive, and the final hour that draws ever nearer. Chapter 4. Song of the Sixpence. The first light of dawn painted Yewtree Lodge in a pale, uneasy glow, the kind that revealed more than it concealed. Windows reflected anxious faces back upon themselves, the grandfather clocks ticking seemed to grow louder, each measured beat a reminder that the rhyme's verses were not merely words sung to children, but an omen playing itself out line by line. Nothing seemed out of place until it suddenly was. Miss Marple stood in the library, the diary she had discovered now open across her hands, its yellowed pages revealing entries written with a frantic, spidery script. One passage, scrawled on the eve of a long-forgotten storm, whispered of a blackbird vanishing from its cage just before the household's first tragedy many years ago. Another hinted at a confession overheard outside the locked room, a confession so shocking it sent a trusted servant fleeing into the night, never to be seen again. In the flickering gaslight, she traced the rhyme's verses against the morning's grim realities. Sing a song of sixpence, a pocket full of rye, 24 blackbirds baked in a pie. Each phrase now matched with precision to each occurrence. Rex found with rye spilling from his pocket, the blackbirds gathering and dispersing as if summoned, the sense of an old promise finally coming due. The household drifted through breakfast in silence, eyes darting over shoulders as if expecting the rhyme's next verse to leap from shadows. Percival muttered half-formed words about an heirloom's vanished key. Jennifer's fingers trembled as she stirred her tea, eyes fixed on a spot just beyond the table's edge. Adele, drawn and pale, hummed fragments of the nursery rhyme under her breath, her voice low and wavering, as if the words carried power she could not resist. By late morning, a new clue emerged. The butler discovered a blackbird, lifeless and perfectly placed on the cold marble floor outside the study. Its wings were splayed unnaturally, a thin line of rye grains forming a circle around it, a symbol that felt less like coincidence and more like a message only the rhyme's author could fully understand. The sight of the bird left Adele gasping in horror, Percival's hands clenched so tightly they whitened, and Lance's eyes glinting with something between recognition and dread. From her vantage at the library doorway, Miss Marple read the household like an open book, rage bubbling beneath thin facades, unspoken rivalries surfacing in hushed arguments, and motives twisting with every whispered rumor. The rhyme had begun to weave its pattern with merciless precision, each clue pointing not to a single suspect, but to a legacy soaked in deception and betrayal. Yet the rhyme offered no comfort, only a progression. When the pie was opened, the birds began to sing. A line that hinted at more voices rising, more secrets exposed, and perhaps more victims before the rhyme's final verse could be sung. Outside, the blackbirds gathered once more in the skeletal branches, their cries slicing through the quiet morning air, as if marking the passing of time and the approach of a final hour none could escape. The hush that settled over Yewtree Lodge grew heavier with every hour, each resident moving as if treading upon a stage where every glance, every step, might betray their unspoken thoughts. Miss Marple's mind worked with meticulous precision, assembling each clue as though the rhyme itself had laid out a blueprint for unraveling the household's secrets. She called for the household to gather in the drawing room, her voice calm yet carrying a gravity that none dared ignore. Faces pale and drawn, they assembled beneath the looming portraits of long-gone Fortescues, painted eyes watching with an intensity that suggested they, too, waited for confessions to surface. Miss Marple began to speak of the rhyme, how each verse foreshadowed events that had already unfolded in precise, chilling alignment. Rex with rye in his pocket, blackbirds appearing and disappearing in cryptic patterns, the second line promising more voices raised in the aftermath of the first tragedy. Her words sliced through the silence, revealing connections that made every listener shift uncomfortably, as though the rhyme itself were reciting their sins aloud. She noted how the blackbird's sudden, violent reaction when gathered on the roof corresponded with the rhyme's line about birds singing upon the pie's opening, voices rising in discord, mirroring the rising hysteria among those trapped within the lodge's walls. Each resident's gaze seemed to grow more haunted as she traced the rhyme's dark path through their recent days. A telegram newly discovered by the butler was laid upon the table. Its cryptic message read only, "Sing, blackbirds, sing," followed by a time midnight. The time struck like a threat, a promise that the rhyme's next line would be fulfilled under the cover of darkness. Lance's hand hovered over the telegram as if it burned his skin. His eyes met Percival's across the table in a look so sharp and unguarded that Miss Marple saw the truth of a rivalry long buried now rising to the surface. Jennifer, her face pale but eyes hard, shifted her chair closer to Adele, who could not meet anyone's gaze, her lips moving soundlessly as she mouthed fragments of the rhyme. The butler's voice broke the heavy silence when he spoke of finding footprints in the mud outside the study window, footsteps leading away from the house to the edge of the woods before vanishing altogether. Who had vanished into the trees, and why? Miss Marple filed this clue among the growing mountain of evidence suggesting the rhyme was being played out with almost theatrical precision, each act timed to match its verses. Yet the rhyme still held verses unfulfilled, promises of more voices, more shocking events, and a final twist none yet grasped. And so Miss Marple paused, letting the hush stretch unbearably, allowing the weight of what was left unspoken to sink deep into the minds of those gathered. As the sun dipped low, casting Yewtree Lodge into shifting shades of twilight, the rhyme's verses seemed to whisper through every corridor, each word an echo that promised the night ahead would hold revelations far beyond the comfort of daylight. Miss Marple lingered by the grand staircase, her gaze fixed upon the family gathered in the drawing-room below. Each face illuminated by the flickering hearth revealed new fissures, lines of doubt, fear, and rage long kept hidden. Adele, her voice trembling, confessed to hearing the rhyme sung outside her bedroom door in the hours before dawn, soft, almost melodic, yet devoid of warmth. She described how the voice wove the words together with an unsettling familiarity, leaving her certain that someone within the house knew far more than they dared admit. Percival's composure slipped further. As Miss Marple spoke of the rhyme's line foretelling birds beginning to sing when the pie was opened, he snapped that the rhyme meant nothing, that coincidences were being twisted into a design where none existed. But his eyes betrayed him, flicking to Jennifer as if searching for support, only to find her attention fixed on the floor, her face unreadable. Miss Marple continued, her voice a measured counterpoint to the crackling fire, recounting the recent appearance of the second blackbird's feather in the study laid across the diary's final page like a cryptic signature. She reminded them of the rhyme's next promise, that voices would rise, and secrets exposed, each confession pushing the household closer to the rhyme's last verse. The grandfather clock began to chime, each note hollow and reverberating through the walls. Midnight, as foretold by the telegram, drew near. Outside, blackbirds gathered on the roof once more, their restless calls merging into an eerie chorus that wrapped the lodge in a suffocating blanket of sound. In the tense silence that followed, Miss Marple studied every face, each flicker of guilt and fear illuminating a different layer of deception. Her mind churned through every clue. The vanished heirloom, the footprints that led into the woods, the telegram's midnight warning, the rhyme's unfulfilled verses, each detail sharpening the suspicion that what had begun as a single tragedy was in truth a carefully plotted game of revenge. Yet still, the true hand orchestrating this pattern of betrayal and terror remained just beyond reach. The rhyme held the final answer, but the line separating coincidence from design grew thinner with every tick of the clock. And so Yewtree Lodge braced for midnight, the hour when whispered confessions and violent reactions might finally expose who had dared to turn a children's rhyme into a guide for secrets exposed and legacies shattered. Chapter 5. The false accusation. Midnight came and went with a silence so complete it felt unnatural, as if Yewtree Lodge itself had paused to listen. The rhyme's final verse still hovered unsung in the minds of every resident, each waiting for the next line to be fulfilled. Nothing seemed out of place until it suddenly was. When morning broke, the household awoke to the sound of hurried footsteps and raised voices. A constable had arrived at dawn, summoned by an anonymous telegram delivered under the door of the local station. Its contents pointed a decisive finger of guilt, one name, scrawled in a shaky hand, accompanied by a single word, confession. In the drawing room, the constable's voice rang out, edged with an urgency that betrayed his own unease. He declared that Adele Fortescue would be taken into custody for questioning, citing a list of clues as proof. Her proximity to the rye, her whispered recitations of the rhyme, the vanished heirloom last seen in her possession, and a motive built on inheritance that would have secured her future should Rex fall. The household erupted in stunned disbelief. Adele stood frozen, her face drained of color. Percival shouted protests, voice cracking with a rage that reverberated off the paneling. Jennifer watched with wide, cold eyes, as though measuring every new piece of information for how it might shift the fragile balance of power. Lance remained uncharacteristically silent, hands clenched behind his back, eyes fixed on the constable with a stare sharp enough to cut. Miss Marple alone remained composed, though beneath her serene exterior her mind worked furiously. She recognized the pattern of a red herring. A misdirection so perfectly timed it threatened to tear the household apart. Her gaze moved from Adele's trembling hands to the telegram in the constable's grip, a telegram that bore the same cryptic signature as the warning of midnight. The butler's voice, low and hesitant, broke the tense quiet as he confessed seeing Adele outside the study hours before Rex's discovery. His statement, once spoken, spread through the room like poison, each word shifting alliances and confirming suspicions long unspoken. Faces turned, gasps rose, whispers bloomed like dark flowers in corners of the room where eyes met and quickly looked away. Adele's voice cracked as she denied every word, her explanation fragmented and desperate, yet unable to form an alibi that could stand against the weight of the circumstantial clues. Her hands clutched the folds of her nightgown, knuckles white, tears brimming but unfallen. Miss Marple watched each reaction carefully, noting the shadowy glances exchanged between Jennifer and Percival, the way Lance's jaw tensed at every new accusation. Outside, blackbirds erupted from the branches in a violent reaction to an unseen disturbance, their wings slashing through the morning air, scattering feathers across the lawn like a silent chorus of alarm. Each dark shape in flight seemed to echo the confusion rising within Yewtree Lodge, the wrong person accused, the wrong pieces fitted into the rhyme's pattern, and the true hand guiding the rhyme still hidden, waiting. The constable's words hung in the thick air of the drawing room, every breath drawn in shallow gasps as the accusation against Adele reverberated off dark wood and silent portraits. The constable ordered Adele to accompany him to the village for questioning, his tone firm yet betraying an uncertainty that flickered in his eyes each time Miss Marple's calm gaze met his. Percival stepped forward, face flushed, voice hoarse with rage as he demanded proof beyond the butler's statement and the cryptic telegram. His shout cracked the room's fragile quiet. Jennifer flinched but did not look away from Adele, her eyes narrowed with a sharpness that suggested she was weighing every advantage that might come from the day's upheaval. Lance's expression remained unreadable, his stillness unsettling to those who noticed it, yet Miss Marple observed how his eyes tracked each person with precision, cataloguing every subtle shift in posture and tone. A single clue missed now, she knew, could condemn the wrong person and leave the true mind behind the rhyme free to strike again. Outside, blackbirds gathered anew on the roof, their calls growing louder, harsher, as though each cry pressed the household deeper into confusion. The sky overhead grew heavy, clouds layering until daylight itself seemed to fade, and with it the hope that order might return before more secrets exposed themselves. Jennifer moved to Adele's side, voice low and urgent, whispering words that only Adele could hear, but the exchange did not go unnoticed. Miss Marple caught the glint of something like triumph in Jennifer's eyes as she stepped back, a fleeting smirk that vanished the instant it formed. A clue, small, yet sharp, slipped into Miss Marple's mind like a puzzle piece finally clicking into place. A hush fell as Adele was led away, her steps faltering, eyes wide with disbelief at the betrayal unfolding around her. The butler's face, once pale, now glistened with sweat as he avoided the gaze of everyone in the room, his hands twisting together at his waist. Miss Marple noted the butler's every gesture, each flicker of guilt or fear. She weighed them against the rhyme's verses and the telegram's ominous timing. From the hall came the sound of footsteps echoing through the marble-floored corridor, footsteps deliberate, heavy with finality, each one reminding those left behind that a decisive turn had been taken, but not necessarily the right one. The false accusation had done more than divide them. It had pushed the household closer to the edge of madness, forcing truths long buried to writhe dangerously near the surface. And yet, even as Adele disappeared beyond the front door, Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on the rhyme's unfinished lines and the telegram's promise of a final hour yet to come, certain that the most brutal revelations still lay ahead. The front doors of Yewtree Lodge swung shut with a hollow thud that seemed to echo far longer than any sound should, leaving those inside caught in a silence so thick it pressed upon the ears. The constable's carriage rolled down the gravel drive, Adele's pale face just visible through the window as it disappeared beyond the hedges, swallowed by the thickening mist that curled along the ground like a living thing. Miss Marple lingered near the staircase, her sharp eyes following each subtle movement among the remaining household members. Jennifer sank into an armchair with a sigh that carried a strange relief. Percival stood rigid, staring into the fireplace as though searching for answers in the shifting glow. Lance slipped into the shadows near the corridor's mouth, the faintest hint of a smile playing across his lips before it vanished like a breath. Whispers rose in the hallways as servants exchanged hurried theories. Some insisted Adele's guilt was obvious, citing her fragile demeanor. Others murmured that the rhyme's verses still held lines unfulfilled, and until every word was mirrored in life, no accusation could truly be trusted. A sense of mounting dread spread like ink in water, seeping into every corner of Yewtree Lodge. A sudden crash rang out from the kitchen, shattering the uneasy quiet. Miss Marple moved swiftly, finding a shattered teacup at the feet of a maid who wept uncontrollably, babbling of blackbirds gathered by the dozens upon the eastern terrace, their cries deafening, their eyes unblinking. Her words sent fresh waves of fear rippling through those who listened. The rhyme had taken on a life of its own, its verses propelling the household toward a conclusion none dared predict. Miss Marple's mind weighed every clue. The footprints that vanished into the woods, The diary's final cryptic entry, the telegram that demanded a midnight reckoning, the rage she glimpsed in Jennifer's sharp eyes, and the violent reaction of the blackbirds that seemed to punctuate every twist of this unfolding nightmare. Outside, storm clouds gathered, cloaking the lodge in an early darkness that seemed to whisper of endings drawing near. The blackbirds' chorus rose in the wind, their cries swirling with the storm's first gusts, a sound so chilling it stole the breath from those who paused to listen. And so the household remained, trapped in a tangle of deception, rage, and clues that led in circles, each suspect more shadowy than the last, each alliance more fragile. The rhyme promised its final hour was near, but with Adele gone, the true mind guiding this game remained free. And the worst revelations still waited, silent but certain, just beyond the next chime of the clock. Chapter 6. The grand reveal. Thunder rolled in the distance as Yewtree Lodge's great hall filled with the reluctant shuffle of feet, the heavy doors closing with a finality that left the household gathered beneath the gaze of their ancestors' portraits, every face tight with dread. The rhyme's verses still hummed through every corridor, each word an echo of the tragedies that had struck without mercy. Nothing seemed out of place until it suddenly was. Miss Marple stood by the hearth, her slender frame dwarfed by the towering stone fireplace, yet her presence commanded silence. She spoke with the quiet authority of one who had sifted through every whispered conversation, every clue buried in diaries and telegrams, every shadowy movement glimpsed in midnight corridors. Her eyes swept the assembled faces, Percival, jaw set and eyes darting, Jennifer, who stared into the fire as if it might reveal the last piece of the puzzle. Lance, leaning casually against the far wall, yet his every muscle coiled tight. She began with the rhyme, laying it bare for all to hear, each verse unfolding like a prophecy, each line paired with a clue. She reminded them how Rex was found with rye in his pocket, how the blackbird's restless flight mirrored a verse promising rising voices and secrets exposed. She noted the heirloom that had vanished from its locked room only to reappear at moments of crisis, each appearance coinciding with a shift in suspicion, a violent reaction, or a new betrayal. The diary, Miss Marple continued, contained more than mere ramblings. It held a cryptic confession, referencing a double life led by one who stood to lose everything if the truth emerged. The telegram, sent to summon Adele's arrest, bore the same hand that had penned entries into the diary's final pages, a hand that sought to redirect blame, to guide the investigation toward the wrong suspect at every turn. A gasp escaped Jennifer's lips as Miss Marple named each clue aloud, drawing lines of connection across days of fear and nights of confusion. Percival's eyes blazed with anger as he realized how motives had been twisted, alibis manipulated, footprints erased, and alliances played against each other like pieces on a chessboard. The butler, face drawn and eyes haunted, began to shake his head, whispering denials even before Miss Marple's words reached him fully. Outside, blackbirds circled overhead, their cries rising in a cacophony that matched the tension roiling inside the hall. The sound pressed upon every listener's chest, each beat of wings a reminder that time was running short, that the final hour promised by the rhyme was approaching with the certainty of an executioner's step. Miss Marple paused, letting her words settle, every detail aligning in the minds of those present. She spoke of the rage that had simmered just beneath polite facades, of the confessions whispered in darkness, of secrets exposed when the rhyme's lines were repeated in frightened voices during sleepless nights. Each revelation sharpened the focus upon the true architect of the household's nightmare, yet she withheld the final name, letting the silence swell with the weight of what was about to be uncovered. The grandfather clock's steady ticking filled the silence left by Miss Marple's last words, each measured beat slicing the hush into brittle fragments. She stepped closer to the hearth, her eyes never leaving the faces before her, voice calm yet carrying the authority of one who had pieced together every vanished detail. She spoke first of the telegrams, cryptic messages whose timing had set the household reeling, whose phrases mirrored the rhyme with unsettling accuracy. Each telegram, Miss Marple revealed, had been sent from a village postbox within sight of Yewtree Lodge, signed with a flourish designed to mimic Rex's own hand. This deception had shifted blame from one suspect to another with every passing day, stirring chaos precisely on schedule with the rhyme's ominous verses. Next, she returned to the diary, its last entries recording words never meant for innocent eyes. In those final pages, a confession lay half revealed, describing an affair that had twisted loyalties and birthed a motive for revenge. Names were obscured, but the descriptions matched moments only those within Yewtree Lodge could have witnessed, their details too exact to be the invention of a stranger. A gasp rose from Jennifer as Miss Marple recited the diary's mention of a shadowy figure seen outside the locked room the night before Rex fell. Percival shifted uneasily, remembering his own words in the dark to someone he had thought an ally. Lance's expression hardened as Miss Marple described the vanished heirloom's reappearance on the mantel during moments of greatest suspicion, each time pushing blame toward Adele or the servants while the true mind behind the rhyme watched from the shadows. Blackbirds shrieked outside the tall windows, their wings flashing black against a sky darkened by gathering storm clouds. The sound pressed upon the household, every beat of wings seeming to mark a heartbeat of the rhyme itself, its verses alive, whispering confessions in the rustle of feathers, echoing the twisted motives coiling through each suspect's mind. Miss Marple continued, recounting how a set of footprints had led away from the study on the morning of Rex's discovery, vanishing into the woods behind the estate. She revealed that the constable had found a small scrap of cloth caught on a bramble near where the trail disappeared. It bore an embroidered monogram not of Adele's initials, but another's entirely, proof that someone else had moved through the night, wearing a mask of innocence. A ripple of shock ran through the room as eyes turned sharply from one face to another, each suspect reassessing every moment, every conversation, every alibi once thought secure. Miss Marple's voice lowered, her words falling into the silence like pebbles dropped into deep water, each one sending ripples of understanding through those who listened. She reminded them that the rhyme promised a final hour, that the hour was near, and that rage, once unleashed, could leave no corner of Yewtree Lodge untouched. The storm outside broke at last with a flash of lightning, illuminating the grand hall in stark, fleeting bursts. Thunder rolled across the estate, rattling window panes, and sending shadows flitting wildly across faces now drawn and pale. In that sudden light, every secret seemed poised to burst from the darkness. Miss Marple's voice rose above the storm's first rumble, her tone precise, each word carrying the weight of the rhyme's verses and the revelations drawn from days of whispered confessions. She spoke of rage long held in silence, of motives twisted into something sharp enough to cut, of a legacy of deception stretching back further than any had dared imagine. She described how the blackbirds' patterns had mirrored moments of violent reaction in the house, each sudden eruption of wings marking the precise instant a secret shifted from rumor to truth. She laid bare the link between the heirloom's appearances and the rhyme's timing, revealing a plan executed with a patience so cold it chilled those who heard it. Jennifer let out a strangled sob as Miss Marple recounted details only someone inside the house could have known, details of conversations held behind locked doors, of private arguments that ended with threats too quiet to reach anyone beyond a thin wall. Percival's face blanched as he realized the depth of betrayal that had unfolded just beyond his view, each clue threaded neatly into a design none had seen coming. Miss Marple paused, the silence ringing louder than the storm. Her eyes met each resident's in turn, resting last upon Lance, who held her gaze with an unsettling calm that belied the chaos swirling around him. She reminded them all of the rhyme's final promise, that when the pie was opened, the birds would sing. And the true architect of every whispered rumor, every vanished clue, every cryptic telegram would be laid bare. Yet she stopped short of speaking the name, letting the moment stretch unbearably, every face frozen in anticipation, every breath caught between hope and terror. The final hour, she warned them softly, was not yet upon them, but it would come, and when it did, every clue would converge, every mask would slip, and every unspoken confession would demand its price. Outside, blackbirds shrieked as lightning flashed again, casting the assembled faces in stark relief. Miss Marple's final words for the night fell like the strike of a gavel. Prepare yourselves, for when the rhyme's last line is sung, no shadow will remain to hide the truth. Viewers, if you wish to stand beside Miss Marple as the final hour approaches, I invite you now subscribe, and do not miss the moment when every secret, every clue, and every twisted motive is revealed at last. You have stood beside Miss Marple as each clue found its place, as every whispered word and shadowed motive converged upon this final hour. Now, the last line of the rhyme awaits, its promise as sharp as any blade, its revelations closer than ever. If you wish to be there when the final truth is laid bare, when the rhyme sings its closing verse and every secret stands exposed, do consider subscribing now. Your presence ensures you will not miss the final, breathtaking resolution of A Pocket Full of Rye. Chapter 7. The lingering evil lightning still traced jagged veins across the sky above Yewtree Lodge, each flash revealing faces etched with terror, resolve, or dawning comprehension. The storm's howl pressed against the windows as though the night itself sought entry, the rhyme's final words hanging unsung yet heavy upon every tongue. Nothing seemed out of place until it suddenly was. Miss Marple stood before the hearth, her voice low but cutting through the storm like a blade honed by years of quiet observation. She recounted the final puzzle pieces, the telegram that matched handwriting found in the diary, the heirloom that vanished only when suspicion needed to shift, the footprints that led into the woods and then simply vanished as though the earth itself had swallowed the culprit. She named the architect of the rhyme's pattern, a mind so meticulous it had guided every clue, every violent reaction, every whispered confession. The household gasped as Lance stepped forward, his face expressionless as Miss Marple detailed how he had manipulated the rhyme's verses into a living blueprint for fear, how he had stoked rage and betrayal to clear his path to the inheritance he had once forfeited. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm as still water. A soft confession of motive and method, a careful recounting of the telegrams sent under darkness, the diary entries faked with a steady hand, the blackbirds lured to appear at precise moments of chaos. Yet even as Lance's words seemed to settle over the room like a blanket of finality, Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her voice pausing at the brink of absolute certainty. For among the gathered family and staff, one pair of eyes met hers with a steadiness too rehearsed, a gaze that neither flickered nor faltered even as truth swept the hall like a storm surge. Jennifer's face, pale yet composed, betrayed no shock, no relief, only a quiet calculation that sent a chill racing along Miss Marple's spine. A detail returned to her mind, a telegram time-stamped an hour after Lance had been seen far from any telegraph office. A whispered conversation Jennifer claimed to have overheard but could not have, given the distance between the rooms, the way her alibi for the night of Rex's demise rested solely on the word of a maid who had since vanished. Miss Marple's voice turned softer, almost mournful, as she laid out these final clues. She described how a second mind must have moved alongside Lance's plan, someone who shaped the rhyme's timing when he could not, who sent warnings to fuel panic and sealed Adele's false accusation at precisely the right moment. Yet as she turned to confront Jennifer fully, the woman's eyes glistened, not with fear, but with a flicker of triumph too quick for anyone but Miss Marple to see. A hush deeper than any before settled over the great hall as Miss Marple's words hung in the storm-charged air. Jennifer's mask of composure slipped for a fraction of a heartbeat, her mouth tightening, eyes narrowing just enough for Miss Marple to know she had struck true. The household's gaze swung to Jennifer, who straightened in her chair, voice breaking the silence with a low, steady tone as she insisted she had acted only out of concern, that every step she took was to protect the family's reputation, to preserve what legacy remained of Yewtree Lodge. Yet each word felt like an incantation rehearsed in sleepless nights, each syllable too carefully chosen. Miss Marple detailed the moments Jennifer had placed herself near every clue's discovery. The blackbird feather found outside the study's door, the diary page revealed precisely when it would inflict the most confusion, the telegrams she alone suggested the constable investigate. These coincidences, strung together, painted a portrait of a mind both shadowy and meticulous, one who watched from the periphery, letting Lance's violent reaction take center stage while she steered events from the quiet edges. Thunder rumbled as Miss Marple described the final clue that sealed her suspicions. The footprints in the mud were paired, one set broad and firm, matching Lance's boots, another set lighter, narrow, yet erased with deliberate care as if someone had returned to the trail to obscure them. She recounted the maid's sudden disappearance, the only person able to confirm Jennifer's alibi, and noted how Jennifer alone had reason to ensure that voice was forever silenced. Jennifer's face lost all pretense as she rose, voice rising with a fury that snapped through the air like the storm outside. She decried Miss Marple's deductions as madness, her words slicing through the room with sharp precision, but every shout only deepened the certainty of those who watched. Percival recoiled as he realized how close he had come to being framed. Lance's eyes widened as he understood he had been a pawn in a larger game he never fully grasped. Outside, blackbirds circled lower, wings whipping the rain into frantic sheets that lashed against the tall windows. Each beat of their wings felt like a ticking clock counting down to the rhyme's final hour, every cry reminding the household that while one conspirator stood revealed, the other had already slipped beyond reach, leaving the game unfinished. Lightning illuminated Jennifer's face one final time before the storm's fury swallowed the night, leaving the great hall cast in flickering shadows. Her gaze darted to the doors as if measuring the distance, calculating the seconds needed to vanish into the storm. But when the light steadied, she was gone. Only the echo of footsteps down the marble corridor remained, swallowed quickly by the roar of wind and blackbirds' shrill calls beyond the windows. The household erupted into confusion, voices rising with panicked questions, hands grasping at empty air where Jennifer had stood. Percival stumbled to the door, his cry lost in the storm. Lance cursed softly, eyes wide with the realization that he had never been the true mastermind. Servants huddled together, whispering that they had seen a shadow slip into the darkness moments before the lightning struck, a figure moving with swift, deliberate purpose. Miss Marple stood perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the open doorway, listening as the wind carried the rhyme's final words into the hall. When the pie was opened, the birds began to sing. The words sounded less like verse and more like a prophecy fulfilled, yet incomplete, as though the rhyme itself promised a chapter yet to come. She spoke softly, voice barely rising above the storm's howl, reminding those left behind that even as one suspect confessed and another vanished, the rhyme's pattern had not truly ended. There remained a final hour no one could predict, a last act waiting for its stage. She urged them to remember every clue, every confession, every whispered word in the dark, because the rhyme had been more than a plan. It was a guide for a legacy of rage, betrayal, and secrets exposed. Outside, blackbirds rose in a violent reaction, their wings lifting them into the stormy sky, circling the lodge once before vanishing into the blackness, their cries fading into the night like an unspoken threat. Rain poured down in sheets, washing away footprints, swallowing evidence, and ensuring the final truth would remain unsolved for now. And so the rhyme's verses lingered in every empty room, in every uneasy heart, promising that until the last line was truly sung, Yewtree Lodge would never rest. Viewers, if you wish to uncover what truly awaits in the final hour, should it ever arrive, do consider subscribing now. For mysteries such as these are never fully closed, and shadows once invited in rarely leave without taking something with them. And so, as the storm's fury quiets above the sleeping village and Yewtree Lodge stands alone in the dark, its ancient stones soaked by rain that has washed away every fresh footprint, one truth remains clear. The rhyme, once thought a harmless nursery song, has been sung anew, each verse come alive with blooded clues, whispered confessions, and rage long denied. Within these walls, the legacy of the Fortescue family has been forever stained by betrayal. Inheritance has proven more a curse than a blessing, alliances have shifted with each whispered rumor, and the walls of Yewtree Lodge have absorbed the final hour's secrets like sponges eager to drink the worst of human nature. Miss Marple stands now by the tall library windows, eyes gliding over the storm-washed gardens, mind turning over each clue like polished stones. The diary that captured a double life in its spidery script, the telegrams that arrived with perfect timing, seeding chaos like clockwork, the heirloom, its shimmering surface reflecting every false smile, the blackbirds, their shrieks rising and falling as a chorus that marked every violent reaction with an unerring sense of dread. And, most hauntingly, Jennifer's last glance before she vanished, a look not of fear, nor of resignation, but of a quiet satisfaction that sent chills through those who witnessed it. A look promising that the rhyme's verses were not finished, that what had begun as a pattern of coincidence had become a carefully orchestrated game played by hands far more dangerous than any had dared imagine. In the hours that followed Jennifer's disappearance, searchers fanned out across the estate, their lamps swinging through fog-choked woods and across fields that glistened with rain, but the storm had done its work well. Footprints had vanished, the path to the village lay empty, and not a single soul reported seeing a woman fleeing into the night. At dawn, the only sound came from the blackbirds, gathered once more on the stone walls of the garden, their wings slick with storm water, their eyes sharp and knowing. Inside the lodge, fear took root in corners untouched by daylight. Servants moved with hushed urgency, pausing often to listen for the echo of footsteps in empty halls. Doors were locked and checked twice, yet every creak of the ancient floorboards carried the suggestion of an uninvited presence. Each resident slept poorly, dreams thick with shifting shadows and rhymes sung in hollow voices, nightmares in which Jennifer's face appeared and disappeared in flickering candlelight. Percival, left with the burden of the Fortescue name, could find no peace in the inheritance he had once schemed to secure. Lance, defeated and exhausted, wandered the halls like a restless ghost, the realization dawning that he had been but a pawn in a much grander deception. Servants whispered of a legacy now cursed beyond repair, and Miss Marple, though satisfied with the truths uncovered, knew the rhyme's ending had not yet been written. For the rhyme's true power lay not only in what it revealed, but in what it concealed, each line a veil drawn across motives deeper than revenge, each verse a mask hiding the final hour's last confession. A nursery rhyme twisted into a map of murder and deception, it left behind an open question more unsettling than any single revelation. Could a game so carefully planned truly end with one accomplice vanished, her rage and cunning unaccounted for? Or would the rhyme's lines find new voices, new hands, and new heirs willing to seize upon the chaos it promised? Outside, the first rays of sunlight cut through the storm's lingering mist, striking Yewtree Lodge with a pale, sickly light. The blackbirds rose into the sky one final time, circling the estate in slow, deliberate arcs before scattering into the countryside, their departure a silent promise that they would return when called by a rhyme yet unfinished. And what of you, dear viewer, who has walked these halls and sifted these clues alongside Miss Marple herself? Have you seen the moments where truth glimmered only to be snatched away, where a clue lay in plain sight only to vanish with a gust of wind? Where words spoken with apparent innocence were twisted into weapons sharp enough to destroy a family? Have you traced the rhyme's verses and glimpsed where they might lead should they find another voice willing to sing them? For mysteries such as this are never fully closed, nor are they solved merely by the names spoken aloud in stormlit halls. They linger in half-spoken words, in diaries half-filled, in telegrams unsigned, waiting for those bold enough to seek them. And it is in your hands, dear viewer, that the rhyme might yet continue, the clues might yet find new connections, the unspoken might yet come to light. If you wish to remain by Miss Marple's side as each shadow lengthens and each secret inches closer to confession, if you wish to hear the rhyme's next verse before the rest of the world, do consider subscribing now. For Yewtree Lodge is far from silent, and some mysteries are patient enough to wait for the next curious soul willing to listen for whispers carried on the wind. Until the rhyme's final hour, thank you for joining us. Sleep lightly, dear friends, for in houses such as these, shadows never truly fade, and the rhyme never truly ends.